All right. Hello, hello, everybody. It's Rochelle with Artful Leadership Coaching and Consulting, and we're back for another awesome Artful Leader interview today. And as you know, my work is really about helping educators to impact young lives sustainably by really putting their own wellness first and setting themselves up for success so that they can really lead with a full tank and also create a culture of community care, because we know when we have a caring community, we don't have to do it alone, right? Everybody gets to contribute and we all get to create a culture of wellness together. And so that's really what this series has been about. And that is why I invited Maria Tan to come and join us today. She's a fellow healing-centered facilitator and coach. And you all know I've been talking about Dr. Angela Acosta's work on healing-centered education, and that's a community where she and I met. And she's got some really cool stuff coming up soon that we're going to talk a little bit about. But Maria is the founder of House of Thriving and the Thriving Teacher Project, and just has a background of supporting folks in schools through mindfulness and trauma-informed practices and restorative practices to really prioritize well-being in schools. And so I'm excited to have her here to share a little bit about what she's up to. And you all know I've been talking a little bit about this summit that they're doing. And so today we get to find out a little bit about what that might have to offer you as you're jumping in this new school year and going, oh my Lord, how do we do this again with another year in the pandemic and a new variant out and all the things that are going on. So welcome, Maria. I'm so glad to have you. Why don't you just introduce yourself and share a little bit about who you are, your work, and what's alive for you right now?
Thank you. Thank you, Rochelle. Thank you for having me on here. This is very exciting to finally be in conversation together. And, we've been in circles together with Dr. Acosta's work. So it's cool that we've finally connected. And It's an honor to be part of this.
Thank you.
A little bit about myself, who I am in the world. I am a daughter, a sister, a friend, also a former New York City public school teacher. And now I am the founder and director of House of Thriving, as you mentioned, and Thriving Teacher Project. And what I'm really committed to is well-being in schools, starting with the educators. I see educators as the tuning forks in the classroom for their students. So it's really important that educators are getting the care that they need, getting the support that they need, and also, getting the chance to slow down. Slow down so that our students, they can model that for our students. What was the other question? There's a few there.
Yeah, just curious, like what's really alive for you right now when it comes to wellness for educators and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. We were talking a little bit before about how sometimes, self-care can almost feel like this, just like word to throw around. And I've experienced it myself being in a school where, administrators or other staff members will say, oh, don't forget self-care, but there's really no structures. There's really no space or structures to support a teacher in engaging with that. So what's alive for me in terms of that is building communities where educators can actually experience self-care, and maybe not in a typical way, but to feel supported by a community of educators who are all about the same thing, right? About really, really caring for their students, about transforming education, and about being well themselves so that they can continue to serve others. So I think a missing piece when we talk about self-care is, one, the structures in the space, and then also the community that can drive that forward and really create the container for that to live, and not to live in a one-dimensional sense, right? Self-care can look like so many different things for so many different people. So the community, I think, really gives that fertile ground for that to grow and be authentic to the context and to the community.
Yeah. Well, and our work as educators is so relational, right? And so I feel like the way that we care for ourselves and the way that we're in relationship with others and our students, it's all relational. And so this idea that we're going to go care for ourselves somewhere away from the workplace or something doesn't really make sense, right?
Right.
We really get to learn how do I really take care of myself in the classroom? How do I take care of myself in these staff meetings? How do I take care of myself when we're in these, we have all these demands on us, or we're all dealing with these various challenges, and so, and how do we prioritize wellness and all of that versus like, oh yeah, make sure you go like turn your computer off over the weekend or whatever, you know what I mean? And so I really
Mhm.
appreciate, I think you and I feel strongly about the same things where it's like, we have to embed those systems and those practices and we have to embed all of that throughout the day and throughout the structure of the school year, or it's not going to happen. And it feels a little unfair to be like, we're going to create the super unhealthy system, but you need to go take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm curious, like how you approach that with the folks that you work with. Are you working with districts or folks who are decision makers? Like, how do you push forward that idea that this has to be really systematized?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And as you were sharing that, what came to me is actually like the first piece of advice that Dr. Acosta ever gave me, which was during a community grounding session that we had. And I had asked him, I really want to do this work at my school. I want to bring it to more staff members. Like, I'm going to bring it to more students. I had just like this internal motivation, and my question was like, how?
Yeah,
How do I start? How do I do this?
yeah,
And he said to me, it starts with you.
yeah,
You have to do the self work.
yeah.
Otherwise, it won't transfer and it's not authentic.
Right.
So with the work that I do, and I have worked with a school district before, from Pennsylvania, and really it's again focusing on centering the educator in their own well-being, and
Mhm.
for them to discover that really through, it can be through mindfulness, it can be through journaling, it can be through restorative circles. I use a combination of all of it. And
Mhm.
it's really to have that educator like start with the self work,
Mhm.
and that can show up in a lot of different ways. It might not be related to what they're dealing with at school. It might be related to personal issues. It might be related to something going on in their homes.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. Yeah, all the things that affect how we show up in the classroom. If you're saying, an educator is the tuning fork, that's a really powerful image of like
Yeah.
how our well-being is so important. My friend always talks about we are like a radio tower transmitting, certain kind of energy to our students all day long. And so all of that stuff that's going on in our personal lives, whatever,
Mhm.
it's showing up in the space. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, in your work with teachers, with educators, of really prioritizing their own wellness and having them explore that, what do you find are the things that really make a big difference?
Mhm. Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, like creating that community, I
Mhm,
think makes a really big difference.
mhm,
When I facilitated the Thriving Teacher Project's first offerings, which were master classes, we did a series of 8 over 8 months, and we had community support groups that followed each of the master classes. So really, we were meeting as a community 3 times a month for 8 months,
mhm,
and there were teachers who just after maybe a couple of sessions or being in the community for 2 months, like really reached out to me and really saw like, I see what's missing in education, and that's focusing on what we're dealing with as educators.
mhm.
And just I've gotten so much feedback on just the gratitude people feel for being able to have that space and being with other educators who are also working on themselves. Um, and you start to see people, you start to recognize people just like you and I in the community that we met in. And there's just there's this a social fabric that's being built, and you feel supported even if you're not directly in physical community with those people. So I think, aside from the mindfulness and the tools and the techniques, just really building that container for people to be in has been one of the most powerful things.
Yeah. Yeah. So what really goes into that for you of really creating that container where all of that is welcome? How do you do
Mhm.
that?
Yeah. Setting the framing is really important.
Mm,
And one thing that I share, especially in the community support groups, um, that this is a brave space.
yeah.
A lot of folks will like to use the term "it's a safe space," and maybe you've heard some, yeah, some feedback from that, or some pushback, I should say, but that you can't guarantee safety.
Right.
Anything can hurt anyone.
Right.
So just encouraging that it's a brave space, that this is a place where we can share what we're dealing with, we can share our experiences, we can process what we're going through. Um, Actually, Castle, the social emotional learning network for the country, has published like a SEL. They published an SEL roadmap
Mhm.
going into the 2021 school year, and on the roadmap specifically was suggestions for teachers.
Mhm.
And for the teachers, one of the suggestions was a place for teachers to connect, to
Mhm.
heal, and to grow.
Mhm.
And I'm like, that's exactly what I'm doing. That's exactly what I'm doing. And, it can be as simple as just creating the space, creating the time, creating a Zoom call, and
Mhm.
just having it open, having people share. You'll be
Yeah.
really surprised how much people will open up when they're given the time and space to.
Yeah, yeah. Throughout the pandemic, my friend Ann Davis and I, who's a somatic experiencing and expressive arts practitioner as well, we held similar spaces and we found the same thing. And we would have like all these really cool activities or whatever planned that we wanted to do for people. And we found folks just wanted to share their stories. They just
Yeah.
wanted to talk. They just wanted to feel like I'm not alone. And because people have felt so isolated, especially when it was the time that everyone was teaching virtually. But I think that, a lot of times people are like, oh, I don't want to get on another Zoom call. And at the end of those calls, people are just so grateful and so thankful to, as you said, it doesn't have to be in person. It can totally
Yeah.
be virtually. And it's really about how those spaces are held that makes such a big difference for people.
Mhm.
And I think having been in education myself and noticing the difference between like how staff meetings are facilitated and the difference between like a restorative, healing, brave space, when someone knows how to facilitate that, it really makes all the difference. And I think, a lot of educators are asking, like, how do we do this? And I think those are the things that make such a big difference, right? Is we're not here to just do stuff. We're not
Right.
to like tick off a to-do list. We're here to really sit and be together with whatever
Mhm.
is in space, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so you've banded together with some pretty powerful folks to put on a big event that's coming up soon. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you so much for sharing it as well on your social media platforms. I'm so grateful. But yes, so House of Thriving is hosting the first ever Thriving Teacher Summit. That's
Mhm,
September 26th. It's on a Sunday.
mhm,
And the theme of the summit is centering educators' healing and well being. So it's really a day for educators to tap into, their sense of self. And with such powerful speakers, like you had mentioned, the keynote is going to be with Dr. Angel Acosta. Then we'll have concurrent workshops with Dr. Kia Darling Hammond and Dr. Yolanda Sealy Ruiz. And then after the workshops, there'll be a little break and there's a restorative session. So the restorative session, it will also be 3 options. There'll be a joy session, a flow session, and a breathwork session. So we really wanted to just treat educators. We'll come in heavy with a keynote, and then some workshops to really like go deep, and then a session to just really support and spoil educators. And then there'll be a closing panel discussion with the speakers. So we're really excited to host this. We also intentionally made it just half a day. Summits are usually like one day or a couple of days long. We made it half a day so it really can fit with an educator's schedule. And
yeah, that's very exciting. And just having been a part of the community with some of the players that you've got involved, I can share with those of you listening, like these folks really know how to hold a healing space that is, where your grief and your stress and your pain is welcome, and where there's also celebration and where there's play and community and creativity. I had the privilege of doing some work with some of those folks as well. So, and I think those are the things that are also super important, right? It's having that balance between acknowledging the difficulty and holding space for the challenge and everything that people are carrying, and generating a sense of joy and generating a sense of flow and ease together, and making space to prioritize that, I think is part of that, really, that healing centered approach, right? It's not just about looking at, oh my gosh, how hard it is and what we're dealing with, but like, let's create what it is that we want. Let's create the wellness that we want to see in our community and in the field of education, right? There's a bigger vision I feel we're all sort of standing for right now.
Right. Yeah, like let's actually carve out time to try on these concepts, to try on the healing. It's one thing. I attended a conference recently where almost all of the conversations were like about healing. But there was no practices. There was no time to really, try it on, to digest it. So yeah, and I've said it a couple times, but just really creating the time and space is really critical.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to continuing to share it with others, and hopefully you get a great turnout that day, because I think it's just so important. And as I'm talking to educators right now, as they're beginning the new school year, I'm hearing so many people just being like, I'm completely fried and I don't know how I'm going to get through another year like this with so much uncertainty and just so much stuff going on. So if that's you, sign up for this summit. I think it's going to be a great day. So I'm curious, one of the things that I like to ask folks who come and join me on these talks is like, we talk a lot about self-care, and we talk a lot about prioritizing our own wellness. What has that journey really looked like for you? And what are your practices or the things that you find really support you and your wellness?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. It was definitely a journey. It is definitely a journey, I should say. And it started during my early years in teaching. So I was dealing with a lot of autoimmune issues, and no doctor could really like tell what was happening, and I was seeing multiple doctors and just dealing with a lot of stress. I believe to this day that they were all caused by stress.
Yeah.
So a really good friend of mine and a colleague recommended that I start doing yoga. We started doing yoga together regularly, 3 or 4 times a week. And I really started to see myself, like my body respond really well to doing yoga. I started to notice myself slowing down, like literally slowing down. I could think more clearly in the classroom. It was a remarkable difference. And when I noticed the power that yoga offered, I was interested in meditation. So then shortly after, I started meditating with a teacher. And that just, that took the slowing down to a whole nother level. And my ability to just be present and give myself space between what happens and the way I respond. So I saw how powerful those were for me, and that sort of turned into other ways of taking care of myself. I started to look at what I was eating. I started to eat healthier, started to eat more whole foods, and then I started to bring mindfulness into the classroom. You were mentioning earlier how sometimes we will separate, like, okay, we'll do our self-care at home and then there's work over here. I really felt that my life was kind of like splintered, like,
Yeah.
you know the meditation and the yoga, like I couldn't do that at school. And then I discovered mindful schools and I'm like, oh, there's actually people doing this in schools, I'm going to try it out. So I just started doing mindful minutes in my classroom, and I taught that for 2 years, every single day to every single student that I had. So in the beginning of class, at least 5 minutes of I called it a mindful minute, but it was like 5 minutes of mindfulness, sometimes 10 minutes. And then I'd also get the students. Yeah, and I'd also get the students that would request a mindful hour, which I wish we could have done, but that just isn't workable. Um, but yeah, so I started to integrate then the healing practices that I was doing with myself into school, and students responded so well to it. In the beginning, they thought it was kind of weird, like, what are we doing? But just after a couple of weeks, if they thought I was going to forget the mindful minute for 1 second, there were multiple students that were like, hello, mindful minute, we can't start the class without it. So that, I would say, that actually contributed to my journey as well, being able to integrate what I was doing outside of the classroom and bring it into the classroom, and supporting others with it. And then during the pandemic, kind of all of the, or I should say actually before that, I got more interested in healing practices, healing centered practices at school. So then I went and I got trained in restorative circles. We brought that back to my school, and we rewrote our advisory curriculum to include restorative circles, and we trained staff on restorative circles. And during the pandemic, kind of all of those initiatives like fell away as we moved to remote learning. And then we saw the effects. There were teachers having panic attacks, there were teachers having breakdowns, students going out of communication. So I brought back mindfulness, just started to do it virtually. I hosted circles with teachers twice a week, and then I did daily Instagram lives with students every day at 5:55 p.m. Would go on our school's Instagram, and then I would do mindful minutes with them. And that's part of the journey as well, is being able to share this work, being able to help and support others.
Yeah. So important. And I love that integration. I find that so powerful when we can live in our wellness in community with others and teach that to students. And especially during a time, I think, where so many people were worried about kids falling behind academically or all these things. And I just kept thinking, what an opportunity that we have to teach them the skills to get through a difficult time. It's like they're not going to get it anywhere else, so it's so important for us to ground in our own practices and then really live them out with the young people that we serve. No matter how old they are, there are so many things that we can do to really give them the skills, because I mean, how cool would that be if they walk out of this pandemic understanding how important it is to breathe and to take a moment and to slow down and to acknowledge our emotions and to connect with others and listen, and all those things that we sort of blast over, and that lead to a lot of unhealthy folks.
Yeah, absolutely. We're so focused on teaching students what to do and not supporting them in how to be.
Yeah.
I think, like you said, this is, it's fertile ground for that kind of teaching now.
Yeah, for sure. So if you, as we sort of wrap up our conversation, if you had one sort of final message for educators watching, or something you wish that they all knew and could really hold on to, what would that be?
It's a beautiful question. Come to the Thriving Teachers. No, shameless plug.
Yes.
The best advice that I got as a teacher was actually to just be myself.
Mhm.
My mentor told me that my first year, and before my first year, I had so much advice from different teacher training programs of, you need to be warm and demanding, and like, don't smile. Someone said, like, don't smile until like Christmas, and I'm like, what? That just is not authentic for me. And my mentor told me she encouraged me to just be myself.
Mhm.
And I think that led to, years later, me being able to integrate myself into my work in the ways that I do, showing up authentically. Uh, Mindfulness was one of the things that I integrated into the classroom, but there were other things. There were many other things, and that really was key in building personal relationships with students. Of course, that's number one. If you want to teach a student, there needs to be a personal relationship there as well. Um, so be yourself, be authentic is one of them, and to take care of yourself. Really, really take care of yourself. If your cup is empty, you know, you can't pour into other people's cups.
Yeah.
Really just taking good care of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. So important. So important. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing a little bit of your story and your event. And I look forward to continuing to be in relationship with you. It's because our work is so similar, and I think that it's really exciting to be a part of a larger movement. You're in New York and I'm over here in San Diego, and I feel like, the more of us that are out here, the more likely these bigger changes will happen in our field, and we'll have different outcomes for educators and students. So thank you for the work that you do. And I just wish you all the best with your upcoming event. And I look
Thank
forward
you.
to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much for having me on here. Thank you for the work that you do. We're creating waves together, so it's really exciting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much, Maria. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.